All right. Let's approach this topic. This came up in a group, men's group I was a part of the other day, the topic. A little weirded out because I'm using my computer to film this and I'm not used to it. So bear with me. Like the screen looks weird to me. So hopefully this will turn out okay. And hopefully the audio will be okay. But we'll dive right in. Okay. So the question was kind of posed, which was, how could people who consider themselves logical or red-pilled, if you know what that means, be religious, or have this belief in God or religion or any of that stuff? And so I want to dive in that topic. Now, understand when I do coaching for relationships and dating, I'm not interested in what religion or what the theological beliefs are of any of my clients. That is up to you to decide what those are. Okay, I'm not a religious leader, so I don't pose to I don't impose any of those values on you. I'm here to give you the information that is true. I'm giving you the truth, the way it is objectively. Okay, you have to take that information and decide with it how you're going to proceed, what we're going to do with it. If we're coaching, we're going to decide that together in a way that fits in with your beliefs and convictions. So hopefully that makes sense. I have actually a lot of knowledge and education on the topic of religion, but I'm not quite resolved with all of it within myself to want to approach that topic on a more regular basis. But I do see value in having a belief in God, in being, for those who are religious. I see value in that, and I don't think that means that you can't be red-pilled or woke or any of that, whatever your term is, because you have that belief system. So I want to kind of approach the topic, and let's talk about a healthy way to approach religion, because, and as far as a lot of you guys won't know what red pill is, so I'm going to link in the description a video that explains it. I didn't originate the term, okay? So, but my friend Richard Cooper, who has his channel, Entrepreneurs and Cars, on YouTube, support it, like it, and get into his stuff. And he has a good explanation that I'm not going to duplicate. So I'll let you guys listen to that and click on the comments if you don't know what red pill means. But essentially, it's having knowledge and an understanding of how things are when it comes to intergender dynamics, how men and women relate to each other. That's what red pill is, okay? And so how can we be logical and have this belief? So first of all, because it was actually touching on Christianity, but let's back up further and talk about just belief in a deity, right? Being a theist or being an atheist. So if you approach the is there a God or not, so we have to look at that question first. And I'm not here to get into a religious debate, you know what I mean? But I'm just going to present the idea, all right? So you have to ask yourself, based on reasoning, if you believe that the world has some sort of a design to it, some sort of intelligent design, some sort of creator, or if you think that it was all basically chaos and an accident. And so we got to examine a couple different things. We have to examine different types of reasoning. And actually, if you look into it's the Dalai Lama, and I'm trying to think now. Did I write down? Oh yeah, The Universe in a Single Atom by the Dalai Lama. Not a big Dalai Lama fan or anything, but it was a great book. Explains different types of reasoning. So you have deductive reasoning, which is your scientific reasoning. Okay, that's where you are taking evidence that is material, concrete evidence, and you're deducing a conclusion. You might have a hypothesis. You might do experimentation, but that hypothesis gets proven, true or untrue based on the concrete evidence you have, and observations and experimentations. So that's deductive reasoning. That's scientific reasoning. That's how we do science, okay? Now, let's look at a different type of reasoning called inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is kind of how you run your day-to-day life. You don't run your life based off of deductive reasoning. If you were to try to do that, you would never leave the house, okay? At some point, you have to make an assumption. So what inductive reasoning is where you don't actually have proof to a conclusion. What you have is a bunch of information, and based on the information you have available, though it doesn't prove inconclusively something, you have to make an assumption, and then you go with that decision. All right, so think about going to work this morning. So you get into your car, and you drive a normal route that should take you 20 minutes to get there, right? And so you're making an assumption based on a bunch of different points of evidence and reason that route's going to be clear, there's going to be any issues, and that you'll arrive to work on time, right? So that's the assumption you make. That's inductive reasoning. Because you actually don't have concrete material evidence to say that route is clear. Now that evidence might be out there, but you're not, from your subjective standpoint, you're not seeing that. It's not like you're every day checking the traffic reports, the weather reports, everything. And if you were, they might be missing something. So you could leave your house and there could be a massive accident that blocks the normal route. And then you get to that point and then you have to detour, and maybe that detour with traffic makes you 10 minutes late, okay? So there's an example of you had to take a leap of faith that this route was clear, as you do every single day that you get in your car, but the material fact was that day that was not the case, and that was untrue. You had to go around. Okay, so that's inductive reasoning. Use a survival example too. Let's say you're lost in the wilderness, all right, and you're trying to find safety. You don't have communication device, nothing. Something happened and you're lost. And you look out in the distance through the tree line or the wood line, you know, and up ahead, maybe a couple kilometers, you see smoke. All right. So there's a lot of things that you could try to assume from that. If you know that people camp or people have cabins or houses in this area, you could assume that it's maybe a chimney. Maybe you're looking at the type of smoke or whatever, and you're trying to make an assumption based on a limited amount of evidence. Now, do you have a drone that you can fly over and provide you aerial footage to give you concrete evidence that smoke is something that you should move towards? No. In fact, maybe that smoke is actually the start of a massive forest fire and you're walking towards danger, right? Or maybe the person in that cabin isn't going to help you, but is going to kidnap you and do really bad things to you, right? Which would be that would be a bad way to go then, okay? But you don't assume those things based on the evidence that you have. You take a leap of faith and you travel towards the smoke. You find that it's a cabin and the dude has a cell phone and he's willing to help and everything's good, right? That's inductive reasoning. We don't have evidence for God, okay? There's no material, concrete evidence that will prove God. If there was, then there wouldn't be a need for people who believe in God to have faith. Faith is not necessary when you have proof, right? So, but it doesn't mean it's completely illogical, though, to have a belief. Let's look at entrepreneurship, too. That's another great example. If I'm starting a business, I can run analytics, I can do a lot of different things, and I could get as much data as I can to know that the business that I'm starting is going to be successful if I do all of these different actions. I come up with a business plan and then I start executing. But what if something drastic happens in the process of that? Or what if there's a piece of data that I'm missing? Do you know what I mean? Maybe then my business crashes and it's not successful. Or perhaps there's some other stuff in there and that I didn't see that is a great opportunity to come across in the beginning of the business, maybe 6 months into it, and it allows my business to explode. And now I'm way bigger than I ever thought I would be, all right? So, I mean, you make your best assumption, you come up with a plan, you action, you take on a leap of faith or a belief, and then you live your life based on that, or you execute your business plan based on that in terms of entrepreneurship. You don't have concrete evidence or proof. You have to have faith at some point that this is going to work based on just the limited information you have. All right, so inductive reasoning is how people who are being reasonable come to a conclusion of, this is the religion I want to follow. This is what I think God is like. You know, you're using a bunch of different data points that could help you conclude that this is the way the world works. You don't have proof. You know, it's not like, God or Jesus came down and shook your hand, said, yep, here I am, pinch me, I pinch you, see, I'm here, and let's go, right? I mean, that hasn't happened. So you have to take a leap of faith. Now, that leap of faith can go any direction. It doesn't have to be Christianity. It could be something else. It could be atheism, for that example, for that matter. Depending on which kind of atheism you're talking about. But at some point, you're making a decision based on limited evidence. You don't have proof for it. And so that's how being a theist works. Now, most people are, a lot of people are taking the leap of faith because they fear death, and it's within their social construct. You know what I mean? And so that's the reason for it. I have other reasons for believing that there's an actual God and a social order having to do with this inductive reasoning. I just don't think it seems reasonable to me that all of this stuff, including this video and everything we have, was just this natural accident. It doesn't wash with my beliefs based on very limited material evidence and just reasoning and arguments I have available. Now, an atheist will argue the other way, and that's okay. None of that really affects, however, the dating and relationship advice, because men and women have different drives and different things that are more or less universal. It's just, and in human psychology is what it is. It's just a question of what belief system you're attributing these things to. You know what I mean? And so, getting into then, what the red pill stuff. So red pill is just, it's really comes from the latest in evolutionary psychology, behavioral psychology, and in sociology and biology. It's the latest information. So there's a lot of things that are out from the latest of the sciences, all right, that tells us how men and women are like, all right? It used to be, well, I don't understand women, and I'll never understand women. And women will never understand men, right? And that is not the case anymore. We absolutely can understand women, guys, right? And vice versa. We can actually understand this stuff with a hard look at evolutionary biology and psychology, right? And so that's where a lot of this awareness comes from. Well, when you're presented with data, okay, that is hard material evidence, you have to then include that evidence into your belief system, all right? I don't have any data to prove that there is no God. Nothing in any really reasonable way would ever prove that. But if I have a belief on how men and women are supposed to interact, and I've based it on, let's say, biblical stuff, and then some science comes down and says, actually, this is the way it is, that's going to cloud the way that I interpret the Bible, or at least it should, because actual evidence should cause me to shift my belief system, even within the belief system of theology. And it is doing that anyway. Like with gynocentrism and feminism, the Christian churches nowadays have become more gynocentric, have become more placating to women, whereas 50 years ago, it wasn't like that, all right? The Christian system of religion is very patriarchal and has a lot to do with men leading. And Proverbs 31 has a great guideline for how women should be in a marriage or relationship, for example. But I've noticed that the churches now have shifted to more of a gynocentric interpretation of what's been written down in the scriptures, all right? And that's another thing, too. I don't know that you can be logical / red pill and be a biblical literalist. All right. The Catholics and the Orthodox and a number of different churches will look at the Bible and look at each book within the intention or the intent of which it was written, right? So, for example, the book of Genesis was written as a legendary story that was passed down orally for generations before it was written down. So it's more like a legend more than a concretely true thing. So that's why most Christians don't ascribe to 7 days being 7 24-hour days. That was the the creation of the earth, right? Most Christians don't ascribe to that literal of interpretation because of the author's intent and why it was written, the way it was written. Now, does it mean that scripture is not true from a Christian perspective? No, it is true. It just, you have to take it in the context of which it was written, all right? And so there's a lot of things in there in the Bible, for example, that does wash really well with the latest information from the red pill community, or we'll just say the Evo Psych community. So when I give, coaching to Christians, they find that a lot of my advice still fits in really well with that stuff. Now, there's a few things that don't, and that's going to be something that is going to have to adjust. And a great example would be our view of the universe and astronomy. I mean, when Galileo was getting in a lot of trouble for putting out and I don't have the terminology, I'm not an astronomist or anything, but basically we had an Earth-centered view of the universe. We thought everything revolved around the Earth at one point, and the churches promoted that. And if you promoted something different, depending on where you were at, certain churches would really, you'd be in a lot of trouble with them, especially when they had power within the state. Well, obviously, science has well proven that the universe doesn't revolve around the Earth. Okay, so that's a pretty well proven fact now. And no Christian faith or religion has any trouble with that fact anymore. But a long time ago, there was trouble with it, right? And it was because of the way they were interpreting the scripture and their beliefs, and then they didn't want to let go of those beliefs once presented with new evidence. So, if you're religious, don't be an Earth is flat and the sun revolves around the Earth person when it comes to intergender dynamics and how the world works with relationships. All right? We have information now that tells us the way it is. This is how it is. This is biological drivers at work. Okay? And so when we have that information, we can apply that information to have good interactions between genders, to have good dating experiences, good relationships with women, and so on. And women having good relationships with men, right? We can level up from that. So don't be stuck in an old paradigm based on an interpretation of your religion. When you're presented with evidence that's pretty well concrete that says otherwise, what you then have to do is analyze and take a look at that evidence and see how it washes, or how it can fit in with your beliefs. And some of your beliefs may have to shift. Does that mean you have to now all of a sudden think that God isn't real, or all of a sudden say the whole Jesus story was a sham, or I'm assuming you're Christian or whatever? No, you don't have to do that. Okay, but you might have to shift some of your beliefs, and you'll get pushback from that in places like certain pastors and different church leaders are going to push back on that because they are teaching and trapped in a paradigm that's based on their interpretation of the scripture, which may or may not be correct. Okay, that interpretation has evolved and changed over time with once new evidence was presented. And we're at a point now, because evolutionary psychology and some of the new information we have now on intergender dynamics has only been around for a very short time, maybe a decade to 2 decades, depending on what information we're looking at. So with new information, beliefs have to shift. And that's a healthy approach. If you're a theist, great. You know what I mean? There's a number of things I may say that might not fit with your religious paradigm. That's okay. Just look at the facts and what's being presented there and the evidence, And then you can figure out how to live your life based off of those facts. For example, we're biologically driven to be polygamists. That's just a fact. All right, that's not really disputable much at this point. Now, that doesn't mean that monogamy is not an adaptive strategy. Monogamy is an adaptive strategy. That doesn't mean you can't be happy in monogamy. That doesn't mean you should never be with a person in a monogamous relationship. But what it does mean is that we're biologically wired for this thing, okay, which is polygamy. So, because for 190,000 years, that's what we were, and monogamy was never even a consideration for the most part. So we have to consider that fact and then figure out how we can, if we want the benefits of monogamy, how we can arrange our lifestyle and our monogamous relationship in a way that satisfies the biological drive of polygamy while being in this monogamous relationship. All right. That doesn't necessarily mean sleeping with other people either, because that's not necessarily what it means. So anyway, I won't go down the road. It's already a long enough video as it is, but you get what I'm saying. A fact gets presented. Now, that might be very contrarian for what your religious beliefs are. Well, if it's a fact, if it's based in evidence, if it's the way the world works, and if it's true, then you have to update your belief system. That doesn't mean you have to throw the baby out with the bathwater and leave your religion, okay? But you do need to make an update and figure out how your religious values can fit in with this new piece of evidence that you have. Well, that's it. So that's how it's done. That's a healthy approach. Also, why, theists aren't necessarily stupid, okay? Different type of reasoning skill than scientific reasoning. Obviously, there wouldn't be a question of belief if we could prove any of these things. Thanks for tuning in. You guys have a good weekend. Hey, like my YouTube channel. If you're watching this right now, go to my YouTube channel and like it. I know you might be seeing this on Facebook Live right now. You can subscribe to that too, but and like my page, that would be nice. But go to my YouTube channel and subscribe over there. All right, trying to get messages out here, and I want to boost the audience so we can get this information out to help more people. All right, thanks again for tuning in.